3 days after my father died, my husband came home from work, placed his keys on the kitchen counter, and smiled. I quit. I stared at him, thinking grief had finally broken something inside him. Then he said 6 words that made my stomach turn. We won't have to work anymore. He wasn't talking about some business idea. He was talking about my father's money. My father's funeral had been 2 days earlier. The house was still filled with flowers, sympathy cards, and half-empty coffee cups from relatives who had come from different states. I could barely sleep. My husband, Daniel, seemed strangely calm. Too calm. While I was grieving, he had already started planning our future. "Your father left you enough, right?" Daniel asked casually that night. I looked at him. I don't know. That was the truth. My father had never discussed his finances with me. He owned several properties and a construction company in Pennsylvania, but he kept his private life private. Daniel smiled. "You don't have to worry anymore." I remember looking at him across our kitchen table and feeling something I couldn't explain. Daniel had been my husband for 7 years. I knew his habits, his jokes, even the way he scratched his chin when he was nervous. But that night, there was something different in his eyes. He wasn't looking at his grieving wife. He was looking at an opportunity. The next morning, Daniel told me his boss had accepted his resignation. I thought he was joking. "You actually quit?" I asked. He nodded. "Why would I keep working when we are about to be rich?" I froze. "Daniel, nobody told you how much I'm inheriting." His smile disappeared for half a second. Then he laughed. "Your father loved you." That's enough. That answer bothered me. My father had loved me, but he had also been careful. He once told me, "Money doesn't change people, Emma. It reveals them." I remembered those words while Daniel walked upstairs to make a phone call. I didn't follow him. Instead, I stood alone in the kitchen and wondered what he knew that I didn't. That afternoon, I called my father's attorney, Michael Harris. He had handled my father's legal affairs for more than 20 years. I asked about the will. Michael paused before answering. "Emma, your father left very specific instructions. We have a meeting scheduled for Friday." I asked if Daniel needed to attend. Michael's answer was immediate. "No." When I told Daniel about the meeting, he didn't ask what time it was. He asked, "Is the attorney going to tell you how much?" I stared at him. "Probably." Daniel nodded. "Good." Then he started scrolling through his phone again. I noticed a real estate website open on the screen. He was looking at houses worth more than $2 million. That night, Daniel showed me a photograph of a huge house outside Philadelphia. 5 bedrooms, a pool, a 3-car garage. "Imagine us living here," he said. I forced a smile. "It's beautiful." He leaned back. "We'll need something like this once the inheritance comes through." He said it with such certainty that I finally asked, "How much do you think I'm getting?" Daniel looked at me for several seconds. "Enough." That was all he said. I went upstairs afterward and opened my father's old desk. I found photographs, business documents, and a small envelope with my name written on it. My hands began to shake. I had never seen it before. On the front were 4 words, "Open after my funeral." Inside was a single handwritten page. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. The first sentence made my heart race. "Emma, if you are reading this, I am gone. I wish I could have prepared you for what comes next. There is something you must understand before you trust anyone with your inheritance." I read the next line twice. Daniel suddenly becomes interested in your money. Do not confront him. I stopped breathing for a moment. My father knew Daniel. He had always been polite to him, but never especially close. Why would he write his name in a letter meant for me after his death? Then I read the sentence that changed everything. "Pretend you know nothing. Let him believe he has already won." I sat on the edge of my childhood bedroom, holding the letter in both hands. My father had anticipated something. But what? And how long had he been watching Daniel? The following morning, I acted normal. I made coffee. I kissed Daniel goodbye. I asked him about his plans for the day. He seemed relaxed, almost happy. "I'm meeting a realtor," he said. "Already?" I asked. "Why wait?" He smiled. "We're going to have a very different life soon." I decided to follow my father's instructions. I didn't confront Daniel. Instead, I asked him innocent questions. "What would you do with the money?" He immediately had an answer. "Pay off the house, buy the new one, invest some, maybe help my brother." I noticed something strange. He never once said, "What do you want to do with it?" That afternoon, I checked our joint bank account. Daniel had transferred nearly $8,000 into his personal account. When I asked why, he said, "Just moving things around." I didn't argue. But my father had taught me to watch actions instead of words. Daniel's actions were becoming impossible to ignore. 2 days later, Daniel received a package. He opened it at the kitchen table while I was pretending to read. Inside was a folder from a financial advisor. Daniel quickly closed it when he noticed me watching. "What's that?" I asked. "Nothing." He stood up and carried it upstairs. I waited 10 minutes before following him. The folder was gone. But I found something else in the trash. A printed email. It was from a mortgage broker. The subject line said, "Pre-approval based on expected inheritance." My hands went cold. Daniel had already told someone about money he had no proof existed. That night, Daniel became unusually affectionate. He ordered my favorite dinner and opened a bottle of wine. "We've been through a lot," he said, "but things are about to get better." I watched him carefully. "You really believe that, don't you?" He smiled. "I know it." I barely slept. The next morning, I called Michael Harris again. I told him what I'd found. There was silence on the phone. Then he said, "Your father asked me to contact you if Daniel made financial moves before the estate was settled." I asked him what my father had known. Michael said, "Enough to be concerned." I met Michael at his office in downtown Philadelphia. He closed the blinds before speaking. "Your father changed his estate plan 6 months ago," he said. "He told me he believed someone close to you was waiting for him to die." I felt sick. "Did he say Daniel?" Michael looked at me. He didn't need to. Michael placed a document on the desk. It was an older version of my father's will. Then he showed me the final version. The difference was enormous. "Your father moved almost all of his liquid assets into a trust," Michael explained. "You are the beneficiary. But the money isn't simply handed to you." "What are the conditions?" I asked. Michael hesitated. "There are several, but the most important one concerns your marriage." I stared at him. He continued, "Your father wanted the trust protected from anyone who might claim your inheritance through marital property." I suddenly understood why my father had warned me. Daniel didn't need to steal the money. He only needed to make sure the money became part of our marital assets. Then, if our marriage ended, he could potentially fight for a portion of it. My father had seen the danger before I had. Michael gave me another envelope. "Your father also left this." Inside was a photograph of Daniel standing outside a restaurant with a woman I didn't recognize. On the back, my father's handwriting said, "Find out who she is." I stared at the photograph until the room seemed to spin. I knew the woman. Not personally, but I had seen her before. She was Daniel's coworker, Melissa. Daniel had always called her just someone from accounting, but the photograph showed them sitting together at a restaurant, holding hands across the table. Michael didn't speculate. He simply said, "Your father hired a private investigator." He slid another folder toward me. I opened it. There were photographs, dates, bank records, and messages. Daniel had been meeting Melissa for months. Some meetings happened during work hours. Others happened late at night. But the affair wasn't what frightened me most. The investigator had discovered that Daniel had been asking questions about my father's company. He wanted to know who owned what, which properties were debt-free, and how quickly assets could be transferred after my father's death. I closed the folder. "How long did my father know?" I asked. Michael looked down. At least 6 months. My eyes filled with tears. My father had been dying while secretly trying to protect me from my own husband. I suddenly wished I could hear his voice one more time. When I returned home, Daniel was waiting. "How was the meeting?" he asked. I smiled. "Fine." He looked relieved. "Did they tell you anything?" I shrugged. "Not much." Daniel walked closer. "Did they mention the amount?" I shook my head. He smiled again. "They'll tell you soon." That night, I pretended to sleep while Daniel made a phone call downstairs. I quietly walked to the staircase. His voice was low, but I heard enough. "She doesn't know anything yet. Once the trust is transferred, we'll be able to move forward." Then another voice answered through the phone. It was Melissa. I returned to bed before Daniel came upstairs. He slipped under the blankets and kissed my shoulder. "I love you," he whispered. I stared into the darkness. For the first time in 7 years, those words meant absolutely nothing to me. The next day, Daniel told me he had found our dream house. He wanted to make an offer immediately. "We can put down half in cash once your inheritance clears." I looked at him. "What if it doesn't?" He laughed. "Emma, your father was worth tens of millions." I said nothing. That was the first time I realized Daniel knew more than he should. My father had never publicly disclosed his net worth. Even I didn't know the exact number. I asked, "How do you know how much he was worth?" Daniel paused. "Everyone knows." It was a terrible lie. I called Michael from the bathroom. "He knows about the money." Michael's response was calm. "Let him continue believing what he believes." I asked why. "Because your father anticipated this. The trust has one final protection. But we need Daniel to reveal his intentions first." I went downstairs and smiled at my husband. "You're right," I said. "We're going to be rich." His entire face changed. Relief, excitement, greed. He wrapped his arms around me. I knew everything would work out. I hugged him back while thinking about my father's letter. Over the next week, Daniel spent money like it already belonged to him. He bought expensive furniture. He paid a deposit on the house. He ordered a new car. Every time I asked how he planned to pay for it, he said, "The inheritance." He wasn't waiting for the money. He had already spent it in his mind. Then he made his biggest mistake. He asked me to sign a document. "It's just estate paperwork," he said. I read the first page. It wasn't. It was a financial authorization that would give him access to accounts connected to the estate once the funds were released. I looked up. "Why do I need to sign this?" Daniel smiled. "Because we're married." I pretended to be confused. "I'll ask Michael first." Daniel's smile vanished. "Why do you need to ask him?" I shrugged. "He's my father's attorney." Daniel became angry for the first time. "Emma, you're making this complicated," he snapped. I looked at him quietly. "I'm grieving, Daniel. I'm trying to understand everything." He immediately softened. "I'm sorry. I just want to protect our future." But I knew better now. He wasn't protecting our future. He was protecting his claim to my father's money. That evening, Melissa called Daniel while he was in the shower. Her name appeared on his phone. I didn't answer. Instead, I took a photograph of the screen. Then I noticed a message beneath her name. Did she sign it? My hands trembled. I understood what it meant. The next morning, I told Daniel I had decided not to sign anything until the inheritance was officially transferred. He became nervous. "Why?" I said. "Because I don't understand the paperwork." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You need to trust me." I almost laughed. Trust was exactly what my father had told me not to give him. Instead, I nodded. "I do." Daniel smiled. He thought he had won. He didn't know that Michael and I were already preparing the next step. 3 days later, Michael called. "The trust is ready," he said. "But before we finalize the transfer, your father included a condition." I asked what it was. Michael replied, "Daniel must formally acknowledge that the assets belong exclusively to you." I knew Daniel would never agree if he understood what he was signing, so Michael prepared the documents carefully. They looked ordinary. Daniel only needed to sign an acknowledgement stating that he had no ownership interest in the trust assets. When I showed Daniel the document, he barely read it. "Where do I sign?" he asked. I pointed to the line. He signed immediately. Then he kissed me and said, "We're finally safe." I looked at his signature and realized he had just signed away the very claim he had spent months planning to obtain. But I wasn't finished. Michael had one more surprise. He had arranged a meeting at the bank for the following Friday. Daniel insisted on coming. "Of course," he said. "We're doing this together." I nodded. "Of course we are." Friday morning, Daniel wore his best suit. He looked happier than I had seen him in months. On the drive to the bank, he talked about the house, the new car, and the vacation he wanted to take. I listened quietly. He had no idea what was waiting for him inside. Michael was already there. He greeted us and placed several folders on the table. Daniel sat beside me. "So," he said, "when does the transfer happen?" Michael looked directly at him. "There will be no transfer into your joint account." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" Michael opened the first folder. "The assets belong exclusively to Emma. The trust was established specifically to prevent marital claims." Daniel looked at me. "You knew?" I didn't answer. Michael continued. "Your father also documented concerns about financial pressure from your husband." Daniel's face turned pale. "That's ridiculous." Michael calmly opened another folder. Inside were photographs of Daniel and Melissa. Daniel stared at the photographs. "Where did you get those?" Michael answered, "Your father commissioned an investigation before his death." Daniel looked at me. "Emma, I can explain." I finally spoke. "I don't want an explanation. I want the truth." Daniel began talking quickly. He said Melissa was only a friend. He said the financial documents meant nothing. He said he had never intended to hurt me. But then Michael placed the mortgage application on the table. Daniel's own handwriting was at the bottom. The application listed the expected inheritance as the primary source of funds. Daniel stared at it. I asked, "How could you apply for a mortgage using money that wasn't yours?" He had no answer. For the first time, the confidence disappeared from his face. Then Michael revealed something even worse. "There is another document your husband signed." He handed me a copy of an agreement Daniel had prepared with a divorce attorney. It had been drafted 2 months before my father died. I looked at Daniel. "You plan to leave me?" He swallowed. "It wasn't like that," I asked. "Then what was it?" He looked down. Michael answered for him. He intended to wait until the estate was settled. Daniel stood up. "You don't understand." His voice echoed through the office. I was scared. I thought I was going to be left with nothing. I looked at him and said quietly, "So you decided to take everything from me first?" He didn't answer. Silence filled the room. Then I remembered my father's final sentence in the letter. I pulled it from my purse and placed it on the table. "My father knew," I said. Daniel read the page. His face changed completely. The letter ended with one sentence. "Emma, if he shows you who he really is, believe him." Daniel looked at me. He hated me. I shook my head. No. He was protecting me. That distinction mattered more than anything else. Daniel begged me not to destroy our marriage. He promised to change. He blamed Melissa. He blamed his job. He blamed fear. But none of it mattered anymore. The man standing in front of me wasn't the husband I thought I had married. I filed for divorce 2 weeks later. Because of the trust, Daniel had no claim to my father's primary assets. The house deposit he had paid was returned. The luxury car was sold. The expensive furniture went back to the store. Melissa disappeared from his life almost immediately. I later learned she had known about the inheritance from the beginning. Daniel had promised her a new life once the money arrived. Without the money, she had no reason to stay. Daniel eventually moved into a small apartment outside the city. He had no job, no new house, and no inheritance. The man who had confidently announced that he was about to become a millionaire had ended up with almost nothing. As for me, I finally opened the last envelope my father had left. I expected another warning. Instead, there was a photograph of us when I was 8 years old. On the back, he had written, "The greatest thing I ever gave you was never money." Underneath the photograph was a final note. "Money can buy freedom, Emma, but only if you know when to walk away." I cried for a long time that night. Not because I had lost my father. I had already lost him. I cried because I finally understood what he had tried to teach me. My father hadn't left me millions simply to make me wealthy. He had left me a way out. A way to see who truly loved me when the possibility of money entered the room. Daniel had shown me exactly who he was. Months later, I sold the family company to a trusted management team and moved into a quiet house near the coast in Maine. I didn't buy the mansion Daniel had chosen. I didn't buy the sports car. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. One evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset when Michael called. He told me Daniel had found another job. I smiled. Not because I wanted him to suffer. I simply realized his life was no longer my responsibility. People sometimes ask me what I would have done differently. My answer is simple. I would have listened to my father sooner. Because the most painful betrayal wasn't discovering that my husband wanted my money. It was discovering that the man I trusted had been waiting for someone I loved to die. 3 days after my father died, my husband quit his job because he thought he was about to become a millionaire. He was right about one thing. My life did change after my father's death, but not because of the money. It changed because my father gave me one final gift, the truth about the person standing beside me.